What if your doctor could predict how well a treatment will work for you before you even try it? That is the notion of precision medicine. Welcome, everybody. I'm Sapo, a PhD student at the University of Oxford, and let's dive into the fascinating world of healthcare, precision medicine, and AI. Whether you're an aspiring doctor, clinical researcher, or applied data scientist, I think this topic has something for each of you. By the end of this video, I want you to appreciate how precision medicine is shaping patients' treatment. I want you to learn how AI is used in precision medicine, and we will also be walking through research papers together. And I want to show you that complex clinical and AI papers are more understandable than you think. If this Olympic shooter on the right doesn't ring a bell, it could have been your off the grid or under a rock, but it could be now your time to catch up. But anyways, I want to bring your attention to the word precise in precision medicine. And I want to ask a question. That is the term precision in precision medicine used in the same way as it is in the shooting Olympics? To understand precision medicine better, let's take a typical patient-doctor interaction. So let's say we have two patients coming in, seeing a doctor, and now the doctor has to decide which treatment they should recommend for these two patients. The doctor has to ask one very important question, which is how well would a certain treatment like chemotherapy work for these patients? Or in other words, the doctor has to predict whether a certain treatment is going to work or what for each of these patients. And remember, each patient is so different from each other that one treatment might work very well for the female patient below, but it might not work at all for the male patient above at the top, just because each patient is so different from each other. It could be like the tumor is very different, or it could be the lifestyle is very different. So we're gonna see that. But now let's talk about how well does a treatment work. And the question of being able to predict whether the treatment is going to work or not is actually very complex and difficult. And as you can see from these two examples, for some types of cancer, over half of the patients have the cancer come back after treatment. Or for psychiatric illnesses like depression, pharmacotherapy or antidepressants does not work at all for 1/3 of the depressed patients. What do these two examples say? It's basically saying that it's very hard to predict whether a certain treatment gonna work or not, because despite the doctor's best effort, over half the patients still had the cancers come back, which means the doctor didn't do, like they were not able to accurately predict whether like a certain cancer treatment would work or not for that patient. And let's take this interaction again. So can the doctor really predict how well a treatment will work? And so, since the ability to precisely predict the treatment outcome is so complex and difficult, we have a notion which is called precision medicine. And precision medicine is precise because we can use information about a person's body to understand each patient's individual differences, and we can use that to try and precisely predict which treatment will work best for them. And so the preciseness referred to the ability to precisely predict which treatment will work best for them. So let's have a moment to think what kinds of personal information could help doctors predict how well a treatment will work. So let's say Sarah comes in with a disease like tumor in the brain. What kinds of information from this patient, Sarah, what kind of information from Sarah could help doctors predict how well a treatment like chemotherapy will work? So remember I mentioned that each patient is very different from each other, and it's important to understand how individual differences between each patient affect the treatment outcomes. And so you can divide these individual differences into three main categories. So first is biological. So biological is anything related to your body. So it could be like cholesterol level, or it could be, the size of the tumor, or certain genes of your tumor, or certain brain activity. All of this can be referred to biological factors. We also have lifestyle and psychological factors that actually influence whether a treatment's going to work or not. So, for instance, the doctor could consider patients' daily habits like diet, exercise, sleep, or stress level when tailoring treatment. So, two patients with the same conditions might receive different treatment plans based on, their mental health status or their activity level, because we have to recognize that, your diet, your sleep can really affect how bodies respond to a certain therapy or medication. And thirdly, and also as important, is the environmental, cultural, and societal factors. So precision medicine can actually, take into account the environments people live in. So this includes things like exposure to pollutants, local healthcare resource, access to healthy food, or like cultural practices and societal norms could really influence the success of the treatment. You know, so all of these things are very important to consider. But remember, for this video, I'm gonna focus on biological factors. But I want to emphasize that all of these factors come together and are very important. If you are like a clinician scientist or like a researcher trying to understand, trying to maybe discover something new in precision medicine, you have to be able to formulate research questions in the field. So if you recall, in precision medicine, there are two important components. One is that we are trying to use patient information in order to predict the treatment outcomes. So patient information is one part of precision medicine, and the ability to precisely predict treatment outcomes is the second component of precision medicine. And so now we can ask a very targeted research question, which is, can we use, for instance, patient information like brain scans to predict how well a certain treatment like radiotherapy will work for a certain group of patients, like patients with, with brain tumor. And we can also ask in another sense of whether, a certain treatment will work better than the other treatment. So can we use information about tumor to predict whether radiotherapy might work better than chemotherapy? Or we don't have to stick to one type of patient information. We can use perhaps a combination of like different biological data like neuroimaging, genetics, and biochemical data to predict whether a certain treatment outcome would work better than the other treatment for a certain group of patients. So we can have like a variety of questions, but it's basically grounded in what you understand about precision medicine. And I hope that makes sense. An important concept related to precision medicine actually is something called biomarkers. Biomarkers are basically anything in your body that can indicate um, like the status of your health and disease. So just for instance, let's say we have a patient coming with diabetes. One way to understand the severity of diabetes is like your blood sugar level. If you have high blood sugar level, it could indicate that your diabetes is quite bad. Or for instance, let's say you want to understand someone's heart health or their cardiovascular disease. So you could use some biomarkers that could indicate that. So it could be cholesterol level, it could be like your heart signal, your heartbeat. If you have irregular heart rhythm, it could mean something. So all of these are biological indicators of certain health and disease, right? And then you can talk about psychiatric illness like depression. So we can have biomarkers like brain activity and so on. So all of these we name it like biomarkers. So just to emphasize, and bringing back to that image of the Olympic shooting and the question that we have of what does it mean to be precise in precision medicine. So to reiterate that precision medicine is not just about hitting a certain target in your body, but it's about predicting treatment outcomes. And as you can see, it's really important to predict treatment outcomes. In and that is why precision medicine is shaping the future of healthcare, because if we can predict treatment outcome, we are improving patients' life. The need the need to predict treatment outcomes is where AI actually comes in, and we're going to learn about that soon. So just to recap, Precision medicine is when we use patient information to predict treatment outcomes. And in order to in order to do this, we're going to use AI, which we're going to find out soon. So to get a better sense of what precision medicine really is, we're gonna do something called journal club. We're gonna do like a modified version of it. So generally, what a journal club is in a research setting is that like a professor or like a research student comes in with a newly published research findings, like a research paper, and they try to present like the intro, the findings, the methods, and maybe they critique and evaluate them. And then you have like a group discussion of like, oh, how does this paper relate to our research group? Or are there any flaws in the way they study? How does it help inform, our lab's findings? So stuff like that. That's what Journal Club is to keep you updated about the field. But today, we will use Journal Club to explore a challenging research study in precision medicine together. And through that process, we will discover and gain a better understanding of how research in precision medicine is normally conducted. And through that, we will also learn how AI and machine learning is applied within the context of healthcare and particularly precision medicine. And through reading this paper, I want to show you that reading such complex paper is actually, it can be, if tackled in a right way, it can be less challenging than you think. So let's dive into it. So just to remind you what precision medicine is, we are trying to use information about a person's body. That's one thing. To precisely predict treatment outcome. So that's the other part of precision medicine. So just keep that in mind. And next we're going to read a paper. So remember, we are using something about a patient body. That's one part. And the reason why we are doing that is we need to precisely predict treatment outcomes. So two things. Please keep that in mind. So here is a paper that probably looks complex for some of you, if you are not familiar with the field or even with neuroscience, but it does not matter because I want to show you that you can actually understand, at least get the main takeaway of this title. So let's try and read. Intrinsic functional connectivity predicts remission on antidepressants. It seems like it's a randomized controlled trial to identify certain biomarkers. So it's very likely, like when you read this title, you don't understand a lot of words. You probably know the word what predict means. Maybe you have heard of something called trial, and you might know what biomarkers is or what imaging is. So before we go forward, I want you to always think in terms of big picture. And if you recall what precision medicine is, there are two components. One is really we are trying to use patient information. And the reason why we do that is we are trying to predict the treatment outcomes. So if we can identify the patient information used in this research and the treatment outcomes that they're trying to predict, you pretty much get the main idea of this paper. So I want you to read again. And can you guess what is the patient information used in this research? So I'll give you a moment to think. Or you can pause the video. But assuming you have tried thinking it through, I want to show you how it would deduce. So if you recall, you're using patient information to predict something. That means any words that come before predict should probably be patient information, right? And yes, it is. Intrinsic functional connectivity is actually the patient information used in this research. Even if you do not understand what this is, you can get a sense that, oh, you're using intrinsic functional connectivity to predict something. And just to tell you what it is basically brain activity. That's what intrinsic functional connectivity is. So the second question is, what are the treatment outcomes that they're trying to predict? Using similar, you can pause the video if you want to think about it. But let's say you have thought it through, you would realize so it's literally kind of grammar, right? So you're using intrinsic functional connectivity to predict something. So what is it predicting? It's probably predicting some treatment outcomes. So therefore, it kind of makes sense that remission on antidepressants to be the treatment outcome. And even though you don't know what remission is, just by guessing alone, you probably have a sense of now the two components of precision medicine. So if you go and do a bit of a quick Google search, you would learn that remission is the reduction of symptoms, right? So let's say a patient comes in with high level of depression, severe depression. Someone who undergoes successful remission would means the depressive symptoms disappeared. So that's a good thing. That means it's successful. So you can see now why remission is a treatment outcome, because it's basically a way to quantify whether the antidepressants or the drug is successful or not in helping the patient, have their symptoms gone or disappear. So I hope that makes sense to you. And so before we move forward, I want to point you out this tip whenever you approach a complex paper. So when you see these complex terms, I want you to try and translate it into like a more familiar concept. And one of the ways is to break it down, break those terms down, and don't get overwhelmed by it. So if you notice that we have a lot of complex phrases that you saw. So the word intrinsic functional connectivity, even if you don't know what it is, don't go into the details of what functional connectivity really means. If you Google, you'll probably see that it's something to do with the brain. So you're like, oh yeah, it's something about the brain. Cool, good stuff. So if you translate complex terms into something that you're familiar with, just stick with the familiar concept first before you dive deep into the detail. Then this would help you get the big ideas. So you have to try and to identify like the main goal of the study. So in precision medicine is basically trying to map out the two components. So for instance, what biomarkers did they use? So for that, it would be like the brain activity. And then what are they trying to predict? So that would be remission or the reduction of symptoms. If you identify the big ideas and put it in terms of familiar concepts, you should be able to get the main takeaway of the paper, and that would allow you to, if you ever want to go deeper into the paper, you can like understand it better. Let's try the same strategy with another paper. So here it says prediction of non-remission to antidepressant therapy using diffusion tensor imaging. Can you identify the patient information used in research? Again, if you feel free to pause the video if you want to, but assuming if you have thought it through, you would realize so let's read again. So prediction, that's probably not patient information. Non-remission to antidepressant therapy. So we already learned what remission is. Remission is the reduction of symptoms. So this is probably nothing about the patient's body. So that leaves with the last three words, which is imaging. So if you see the word imaging, it probably refers to something about your body, about the patient's information, right? Something about the body. So therefore, it's very likely like this paper is trying to use the diffusion tensor imaging to identify patient information. And just if in case you're interested what DTI is, it basically images the connections, the structural connectivity, the structural connections between like two neurons, and you get like these beautiful looking maps showing like all the connectivity within the brain structure in terms of like neuron structures. Okay, for the second question, what are the treatment outcomes you're trying to predict? Again, pause the video if you need to think, but actually I have kind of given you hinted already. So you have known what remission is. So it would make sense that non-remission would be the treatment outcome trying to that they're trying to predict here. Anyways, so all of these papers in some ways would probably use clinical trial, and that would something you see a lot in healthcare research. So what a clinical trial is? Clinical trial, think of it like an experiment on human beings. But instead of testing something in a lab, we are testing how a treatment or medicine works in people. And actually, the end goal of mostly the end goal of the clinical trial is to evaluate whether that treatment was successful or not. That's kind of like the end goal of clinical trial. So, but how do you do that? First, in every clinical trial, researchers have to recruit patients for the study. This is very important actually, because if you just observe the patient, in the natural setting. That is not a clinical trial. We have to conduct an experiment. And that's the only way we ensure that we control for a lot of variables that might, that might not be related to the treatment itself. And so just know that in clinical trial, you have to recruit patients. For within the context of precision medicine, if you recall, we want to use something about the patient's body to predict treatment outcomes. So the most valuable way to do that, if we collect data, let's say brain scans, before the treatment, because it would be helpful, right? Like imagine in a real setting, you can take like your brain scan, and if you before you undergo treatment, and hopefully the doctor comes up with a way to predict, like, oh, if my brain looks this way, I can you should do certain treatment like antidepressants because your brain is more responsive to antidepressants rather than psychotherapy. So that's why in every kind of research, it's often very nice to collect data before the treatment actually starts. Once you do all of that, patients are intentionally assigned to certain treatments like drug A or drug B or treatment C or whatever. And once they undergo certain treatments, we try to measure treatment outcomes. So we have described remission, non-remission, but it could also be something like size of the tumor, with if the tumor has disappeared, then that's a successful treatment. If the tumor became bigger, then that's a worsening treatment outcome. So these 4 points, I hope you understood. And the fifth one is very important. That's why AI comes in. If you want to use something about the pre-treatment patient data to predict treatment outcome, that's where the machine learning comes into play. And we're going to see how that's being used in the next slides. So just for context, machine learning is often used to predict something. So for instance, this is a valid machine learning question. So can I predict your grades based on your studying or sleeping patterns? So that's a machine learning problem statement because it's about predicting your grades based on certain variables. In precision medicine, it's a very similar kind of problem. We want to predict treatment outcomes using like data about using pre-treatment data or using information about the brain, for instance. So to make this a machine learning problem, we have to define what a treatment outcome is. So one way to do that is we simply divide patients into remitters and non-remitters. And remitters is similar terms to remission. So remitters are patients who got much better after the treatment, or basically those whose treatment was successful. And non-remitters are those whose treatment did not work at all, unfortunately. So once we have defined the treatment outcome, we have to think of how we're gonna use algorithm. So like we mentioned, right? In precision medicine, we want to use some information about the patient's body to predict the treatment outcome. So in the paper we have seen, they actually have used pre-treatment brain data to classify, remitters from non-remitters. And in other words, can we use brain data prior to treatment to predict who would be remitters or non-remitters, like after 6 weeks of treatment or something? So how does the machine learning algorithm actually predict stuff? So before that, we have to define a machine learning problem, which we did, which is to use pre-treatment brain data to classify or predict who would go on to become remitters or non-remitters. And in every machine learning, we often have like two phases. One is training and another one is testing. And we're going to see how this works. Okay, so let's give an example of a machine learning example, and I'm gonna draw an analogy to human beings taking an exam. So within the context of machine learning, let's say we have 100 patients in our research. For training, we could, for instance, show the algorithm 40 brain images of remitters and 40 brain images of non-remitters. So in total, we are using 80 brain images out of the 100 for training the algorithm. If you were to think in terms of human beings, it could be the case that we show students practice test and and allow them to check their answers whether it's correct or incorrect. Let's talk about the testing phase. So in the testing phase, one way to do that, for instance, would be, we test the algorithms by giving 20 new brain images. And to test them, the algorithm will have to try to guess whether this brain image belongs to a remitter or non-remitter based on what it learned during the training session. Okay, so that's what testing is. And to draw an analogy to human beings, it could be that we test students by giving them new questions on their final exams, and the students try to get the correct answer based on what they learned during the practices or the training phase. Now, after you do this training and testing, you would want to evaluate how well the machine learning algorithm did during that test phase. And one simple way is to literally calculate whether it correctly or incorrectly predicted remitters from non-remitters. So we measure the accuracy. And in terms of human beings, you can see their final score. That is basically the measure of accuracy for, a test, right? So I hope it makes sense of what it means to train and test in machine learning. However, if we test the algorithm only once, and let's say our evaluation says the algorithm did so well, it has like 99% accuracy and whatever, but how do we know that that is not a fluke? How do we know that it's not by chance, or like the algorithm might have gotten lucky, right? So to ensure that the model accuracy is real, we use a confirmation method called cross-validation. So this diagram, and I'm going to explain through this diagram, and this would help us understand a lot of machine learning results. So if you recall, we trained the algorithm using 80 of the brain images, and then we tested the algorithm using the remaining 20 brain images that it has never seen before. To describe this in more formal terms, we basically divided 100 patients into 5 equal groups of 20 patients, and we will call these groups as folds. Okay, folds. So for training, we train the algorithm using 80 brain images of patients, or 4 groups of 20 patients, or 4 folds basically. And then we tested the algorithm by giving the 20 new brain images, or the remaining group of the patient that the algorithm has never seen before. If we do this once, which is what I have been describing so far, we call this the first iteration. And iteration simply means, the number of times this process has been repeated. But now, in the other iterations, we simply choose a different group of patients as test. And in each round, or in each iteration, you train the model on 4 folds, and then you test it on the 1 fold that is left out, or that the algorithm has not seen before. And then you repeat this 5 times, and each time you use a different fold for testing. For each of the iteration, or each of the repetition, you try to get the performance or the accuracy. Okay? And then after you do 5 iterations, you then try to average this accuracy. And then this average accuracy, or cross-validated accuracy, it's basically a more reliable measure of how well the model performs overall. So by doing it 5 times, we make sure that the model didn't actually get lucky, and indeed it performs consistently well. Now that you understood what cross-validation is and what machine learning is about, you should be able to understand the results. So these 2 papers were the papers that I have discussed earlier, the exercise with it with the title. And so let's see now. So let's read the first bullet point from a paper. So here it says, in validation analysis, we demonstrate that PC, CACC, and PFC connectivity. So you know what connectivity is, probably something to do with the biological part of, the patient's body. So we know that PCC, SCC, MPFC connectivity is something to do with the brain. So let's just call it brain connectivity. So we demonstrate that brain connectivity predicts treatment outcome or remission status with 80% cross-validated accuracy, which is pretty good. So you know that, oh, somehow this area of the brain is useful in predicting treatment outcome, and and they did it with pretty high accuracy. So see, now you understood this result. Let's try another one. A value of greater than 1 for the ratio of the fractional anisotropy of the stria terminalis over the CGC. So again, this is something to do with the brain. So let's call it something about the brain. So something about the brain basically identified the non-remitting participants or predicted treatment outcomes like non-remission with a pretty high accuracy of 88%. So you see, now you understand this part of the result as well, is that something about the brain was able to predict non-remission with a pretty high accuracy. That's what basically this is saying, and is giving us a bunch of numbers for different patient data set. And for now, it's okay to not understand it. But when you go and read the paper itself and like search what OR means, CI means, then you will get a better understanding. But since you have understood the main takeaway, it's now easier to like unpack like other like tiny details. So, if you love reading research and want to improve your research skills, I would love you to join our Discord community called Clematis, or Clematis Research Empowerment Hub. And one of the channels in our Discord is actually dedicated to sharing and discussing, about fascinating research out there. And if we have a very tight-knit community filled with high school students, undergrads, graduate students, instructors, and research enthusiasts from all around the world. If you have any questions about research or about this video, please don't hesitate to ask in our Clematis community, and you can join using the shortened link here. Thank you.